Hey everyone, it's Ken here again.
In our last video, I showed you these 9 different ways to join your data. So let's go take a look at how to actually build all these in the real world. So here we are inside our data file, and we've got our 2 tables. We have transactions and we have our chart of accounts. Now, if you're not familiar with the way this works from an accounting world, the chart of accounts is basically a listing of valid accounts that can be posted to. And you'll notice that I have a couple of accounts here that have not been posted to, and that's why they're actually highlighted in yellow. So at the end of the day, this is an interesting stat, but it's not really worrisome. On the other hand, in our transactions table here, we should only ever post transactions to accounts that already exist in the chart of accounts. And in this case, we have 2 accounts here that have been posted to which don't exist in the chart of accounts. And any accountant will tell you that is very bad and should not happen. Now, I've also already set up 2 queries here. We have transactions and we have COA, which is short for chart of accounts. And what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually create each of the different join types to show how they actually vary and how we can create them. So we're going to start by doing this. Right click on transactions. We're going to say merge. Of course, we could reference them and merge them again. That's fine, but I'm going to start here. This time around, what I'm going to do is I'm going to merge this to the COA, or the chart of accounts. Now, here's a challenge that we have right now. The relationship between these guys is actually a bit more complex than just account and account, because I have many different account numbers here and many different account numbers here. But the reality is that if we check, we've got account 64010 We've also got an account 64010 So the same account exists in multiple departments with different names. So in order to actually look these things up, what I would normally have to do is create a column to concatenate 64010-150 or 64020-150 and so on to be able to look these up between both tables. But I happen to be able to create a complex join in Power Query simply by holding down my control key and clicking the next department. You'll notice this gets a 1, 2, and likewise a 1, 2. And at this point, I can now actually light this join up and start creating it to merge my tables. This essentially does create a join that you never see, but it acts like it has a delimiter. And this is important because if you have a column that is products 1 through 11 and department 1 through 11, if you were to make your own join and just do 1, 1, 1, you'd have to know, is that product 1 and department 11 or product 11 and department 1, right? So that's a bit of a challenge. So this treats it as if it has a delimiter so you can never get confused that way, which is great. We're going to go with the default left outer join. You'll notice it tells me that it's matched the first 6 out of 8 rows. No big deal. What we're going to do is we're going to say, okay. And this will create us our new join. And we see that we have our account, our department, we have our date. I'm just going to go and change this right now to be a date instead of a date time. I've got my amount, and then I have my COA table. And what I'm going to do at this point is I'm actually going to go and click on this guy here, and I'm going to use the original column name as the prefix. So it's going to come up with all the columns called COA.account, COA.department, COA.name. And that way they don't conflict with the account, the department, and the name that we have. We don't have a name column, but it won't conflict with the account and department. And when we say OK, you'll see that it expands the table. And these 2 records, which don't have a match in my chart of accounts, fill in with null. So this is the left outer join. Now, I'm not forced to commit this right now. I can actually take a look at some of the other queries as well. What I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this guy here, and I'm going to choose to duplicate this one. So this gives me the exact same query, and I'm going to convert this one. I'm going to call it the right outer. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back to the source step, because the source step, if I click the gear icon, is where we actually performed our original merge. So the only thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to change this instead to say, look, the join kind, we went with the left outer. What if we had chosen the right outer join? If I'd said okay, it would have reconfigured. You'd see that we have some null values. Why? Well, because this is the record that shows the 2 yellow accounts that didn't exist. And when we go and expand this column, we can now see those records actually show up. So that's kind of a cool thing. Now, Keep in mind, there's no need to actually expand or keep all these individual columns once you've made your join. That's fine. But in this case, it actually worked to help make sure that things are nice and clear. So let's try another one. Let's go right click and we'll say duplicate again. Let's do the full outer join. And for the full outer, I'm going to go back to the source again. And I'm going to say, what would have happened if we had chosen the full outer join? We'll say OK. And then we'll go down to where we expanded the chart of accounts. And you'll notice that the yellow records are showing with nulls in the first 4 columns. The red records are showing with nulls in the last 3 columns. So if I were to land this out, now I can see where the holes are in my data. So that's actually pretty useful as well. We'll now go again, click and duplicate, and let's try taking a look at the inner join. So we'll go back to source. And by the way, if I happen to know the join types, I can actually just change them here in the formula bar as well, just to be a little bit different. I'm going to call this one the inner join. Notice it shrinks up a little bit. When I go in and expand it, now it only shows me the rows that match. There's nothing that was a red record that didn't have a match in the chart of accounts, and there's nothing that's a yellow record that didn't have a match in the transactions table. So there's some kind of interesting ones as well. Once again, we're going to right click and we're going to duplicate this one. This one, we're going to go and set up as the left anti-join. We'll go back to the gear icon. Notice this is the inner now. We'll go left anti. This should show me only the records that don't have matches in the chart of accounts table. And indeed, these are the 2 that don't have a match in the chart of accounts. Once I expand the chart of accounts, we can prove that out. There we go. Let's try one more. Right click. We'll duplicate this guy too. And we'll make this guy into the right anti-join. The right anti is going to flip this story up a little bit. Instead of showing me all of the records from the transactions table with no match, this will now show me the rows from the chart of accounts table that don't have a match in transactions. So this is your left table at the top. This is your right table at the bottom. And that's why it actually marks it here, rows only in second. We can say, OK, expand our chart of accounts. And sure enough, here's the accounts that have no transactions posted to them. Again, one of the joins that I believe is super useful is actually the full anti. But what you'll notice is that if I go back to reconfigure this, there is no option for a full anti join. However, I've made a left anti join that has my account, department, date, amount, COA account, COA department, COA.name. I have a right anti join that has the exact same column names. So in this case, I can right click on the left anti join. I can reference it. I can call this one full anti, and I can append the right anti to it. Because all of the column names are the same, it will stack those guys on quite nicely. So that's how we actually go back and build our full anti join. We just make sure that we have a left anti and a right anti that are both built and fully expanded to have the same column names. And then we append the 2 together. And at this point in time, I have a full anti join. Even though Power Query doesn't provide it by default, I've got the ability to go and actually build this out to build what I need. So that's pretty cool. And from here, all we would do is close and load all of these tables so that we can look at each and every individual one.
But you'll notice that we have a worksheet with each of the different join types illustrated here. But of course, we don't have our semi-joins yet. So let's go and add those in. And I'm actually going to do this my preferred way for merging tables, which is not to right click and choose to just merge here. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to reference this query instead. So this is going to create a new query right now, which is called transactions 2. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this one left semi. Now, the reason why I like to do this is because unlike left outer, where if you notice the source step here, it has the gear icon that indicates something's going on here. This is the actual left outer join. So right from Excel, what we did there is we basically said, hey, let's go right click and let's merge. In the left semi, what I've done is I've said, let right click and reference. And I can see that this is now pointing to the transactions table. So when I go to set up my merge query here, I'm going to get a second step. So this actually makes it very, very obvious what's going on. So here we go. Let's merge to the COA table. I'm going to grab account and hold down control and grab department on both tables here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with a left anti-joint because I'm going to the left semi. Now, honestly, it doesn't matter which joint you start with. I just find that this is the most like for like comparison that we're actually working with. So notice now, because I chose to reference to begin with, I've got a pointer back to transactions, and I've got a separate step that's very obvious that I've merged queries, much more obvious than what I did with left outer. You can't really tell that I actually merged queries without actually going back and actually checking what's in the source step. This just helps for auditability, in my opinion here. So, all right, now what we've got right now is we've got a left anti-joint. So here's what we're going to do is we're going to change right here. Instead of our left anti, we're going to change this to left semi. Now, one day this will show up in the user interface, but right now it's not there. So let's go with left semi. Notice it changes all the records here. But remember, big thing that's different between this and a left outer join, the left outer would have values here. Okay. We can actually see that if we hop back to left outer, go back to the source, and click on our COA table, we can see the values are showing up. The left semi would have these as null, as we can see right here. Okay. So at this point, there's no point in expanding this column because why would you? So we can just go right click and choose remove or select the column and press delete, whatever works best for you. Now, if I want to do the same thing with a right semi join, what I can do is I can go right click on transactions here. We can reference that again. I'm going to rename this one here. We'll call this one right semi. I'm going to go to merge queries. Now, inside here, I'm going to again pick the chart of accounts or COA query. I'm going to grab the account and department. And I'll just show you, because I didn't actually show you before, the semi joins do not show in this list. Okay, so this will work in Excel, this will work in Power BI, but in all cases right now, as I record this video, you have to make these modifications manually. So we'll set this one up. We'll say, okay, we are. It's given us, oh, I chose a left outer here. Well, that's kind of silly. Doesn't really matter. Let's just change this one now to right semi. And you can see they all come up in the IntelliSense, so we can get the right one. So even if I chose the wrong one to begin with, we can get there. As I'd mentioned, my intent was actually to choose the right anti, which would look identical, except this gives us these two values here, where when we go to the right semi, we get all of these. So now, in order to finish this one off, unlike the left semi where we basically delete this column, instead we're going to go right click, remove other columns, and then we'll expand the COA column. I'm not going to bother using the original column name as a prefix in this case, because really all I'm interested in is this information here. And I now have my right semi expanded as well. So that is how to go through and create the 9 joins in Power Query. The exact same steps will work for Power BI.